Now let's continue. So we talked about, we've been talking about giving, relinquishing, releasing, paying, and things like this. We talked about the obligation of paying zakat, the obligation of supporting one's dependents, those whom one's obligated to support. One might support others voluntarily, but there are some that one must support. We talked about the obligation of paying your employee. And we talked about offering a reward for a task completed and giving a prize for a game or a contest. We talked about giving something to someone to hold it for you for safekeeping. We talked about allowing someone to hold your item and use it. We talked about giving loans, monetary loans. And still on the theme of giving or releasing, relinquishing, we're talking about now a dedication. What's called in Arabic waqf. Waqf means in Arabic stopping. This is the case of owning something and then dedicating it for some usage in such a way that you don't own it anymore and it can't be used in a way other than how you dedicated it. So we're talking about here then giving something without getting it back. Giving something without getting it back. So giving something without wanting it back includes feeding a guest, because he's not going to give you the food back if he's going to eat it. But don't forget, and I just had this conversation with someone, if you feed someone, that doesn't mean he can just take your food and leave, like out of your house. If you have a party or get together, you provide the food, barbecue, whatever, and you have loads of food, and you have guests, then if you want to make sure nobody commits a sin, say to them, feel free to take home any food you want to take, for example, so that they don't take it without invitation, because that's haram. Subhanallah. And maybe I told you before, how did I first learn this judgment? That you can't just take someone's food. Just because someone gave you food to eat doesn't mean it's yours. How we learned that. How I learned it. When I was studying overseas, they used to feed the students who lived in the dorms, not the students who came from their own homes. Students who came from their own homes, they'll bring their own food. Students in the dorms, they used to feed us. So sometimes we would have za'atar on bread with olive oil and za'atar, so tasty. Those were the tastier breakfasts we used to have. Sometimes we had breakfast that wasn't my preference personally. Those ones were so delicious, everybody liked them. And then what some students used to do, they started selling their za'atar that they were given to the people who would come to school from home. So when the sheikhs knew that this was happening, they told us it's not permissible. You don't own that so that you can sell it to someone. So just because someone gave you food to eat doesn't mean it's yours, you own it. You don't own it, it's theirs. They're allowing you to eat their food and swallow their food. So then people got used to going to a gathering that has a lot of food and just taking food and leaving with it. So don't do it without asking. And if you do ask and the person, of course, then okay, you don't have to comment on the of course. Or if they say, well, why are you asking? Then tell them the religious judgment. Maybe they will benefit. So giving something without wanting it back includes feeding a guest or leaving an inalienable endowment. Or I like to call it a dedication. And sometimes I refer to this issue as Islamic philanthropy. You know what philanthropy is? Like when someone has money, it's like a wealthy person. Maybe he builds a hospital or likes of that, or builds a well for a village or something like that. Makes a school for orphans or for boys or for girls or something like that. So you could do something like that in our religion. There's rules for that. It is dedicating to a permissible existing cause, a specific entity. Yani dedicating to a permissible existing cause. Permissible existing cause like saying the poor people. Dedicating to the poor people something. Or to the widows, or to the orphans, or to the students of knowledge. Dedicating to a permissible existing cause. A specific entity, like a house, or a plot of land, or an orchard. A specific entity whose ownership is valid to be transferred. An entity whose ownership is valid to be transferred and can be used for a rentable time without consumption. Yani something that you could rent, something you could rent out, you could dedicate it. By that, it exits the dedicator's ownership. Once you dedicate it, like you say, I now dedicate this land as a cemetery for the Muslims. Or I now dedicate this land as a masjid. So that means they're going to build a masjid on the land. But even without the building being there, it would be a masjid. The land would be. If you pray within the area that was dedicated, you get the reward of praying in a masjid. It exits the dedicator's ownership and becomes restricted to his specifications. So he says, I now dedicate this house as a shelter for widows, or shelter for homeless, or shelter for travelers, or a shelter for people released from prison and they don't have a place to stay. Whatever your specifications are. It is a condition that the beneficiary can own the item religiously, with some exceptions. Yani, this thing you want to dedicate, can the one you want to dedicate it to own it? Yani, theoretically, could he own such a thing? Yes, then you could dedicate it to him. With some exceptions, like a dedication for the slaves who are dedicated to serve in the haram, masjid, and slaves who are dedicated to serve the grave of the Prophet, alayhi salatu wassalam. That's valid dedication, although slaves can't own anything, is the point there. Slaves don't own anything. With one exception, though. Anyone remember the exception of a slave owning something? What's the exception of a slave owning something? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Mukatab slave, that's the slave who he's done a contract with his master to purchase his freedom. Mukatab slave. This one he can own as long as his contract is in effect, so that he can earn money and then buy his freedom. So you can dedicate for the slaves or to the slaves. Yeah, it means something, you're going to dedicate something to be used for those slaves. The slaves who are dedicated to serve in the haram, and the slaves who are dedicated to serve the grave of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And if those slaves are dedicated, so the slave himself is a dedication. Someone had a slave and then dedicated the slave to serve in the haram or to serve at the Prophet's masjid. So that means they're going to spend the rest of their lives there. But for us as Muslims, we know this means something good. This doesn't mean he's going to be excruciating labor, walking around with his muscles bulging, sweating because his master doesn't make him stop. He doesn't have any particular master now. He was dedicated. But he didn't get out of the status of slavery, though.
Doing it, can you free the slave?
You can't free the slave if he's not your own slave. So I don't know how such a person could become free after that. That's why, according to what I have here in my own notes, he's going to spend the rest of his life there. Because now he's been dedicated. Once he was dedicated, whoever owned him doesn't own him anymore. So he doesn't have any particular owner who could free him. And also, don't forget, a dedication stays a dedication until Judgment Day. Or until it perishes. MashaAllah. But in mind of a kafir, this means something so horrible and excruciating, which is not the case. So we're saying that if you're going to dedicate something to someone, it's a condition that what you're dedicating is something that that person is the type of thing that that one could own. But there's some exceptions to this rule, because it's permissible to make dedications for the slaves who are dedicated to serve at Al-Masjid al-Haram, and the slaves who are dedicated to serve at the Prophet's grave. And also you can make a dedication for feeding the pigeons in Al-Masjid al-Haram. So the pigeons can't own anything, but you can make a dedication. You can leave a dedication so that those pigeons could be fed. Or you could make a dedication for the war horses. You can make a dedication for the war horses. If the Muslims have war horses, and then you say, I dedicate this for the war horses. That's valid, although, because animals can't own anything, but this would be a valid dedication. Thus, if an olive tree orchard was dedicated for that, what would they do? They would sell the olives, and with the price, they buy the food for the pigeons. And if the named beneficiaries are missing, whoever's supposed to be the ones who benefit from this dedication, it would be spent on the Muslims' most important matters and the poor, and not sold. That last part, I don't know how to explain that. I'll have to review that. And there's more details for dedication, but that's just brief summary for you. And now we want to talk about gifts. Charities, gifts, and donations. Giving for free includes a charity or a handout for someone's need, or an offering for rapport. Rapport means good relations. Or, which is basically a gift or a present. Every sadaqah and hadiyah is a hiba. What does that mean? So the sadaqah is a charity. Hadiyah is a present. And a hiba is a gift. So all of these basically fall under gift. The charity is a gift. An offering is a gift. But it depends on your intention, how you're going to use the word. So, like we said here, if it's a handout for someone's need, then it's a charity. Or let me say, if it's for someone's need, if this gift is for someone's need, then that's going to be a charity or a handout. And if this gift is for rapport, that means relations, then it's an offering or it's a present. Like if you gave something to your own child or you gave something to your spouse. This is not a charity. This is a gift. Although the appearance is the same. Like I could give $10 to a poor person, I could give $10 to my son. So in one case it's a charity, the other case it's a gift or present. Yeah, you could call it a sadaqah in all those cases. You can call it a sadaqah. You said during Prophet Muhammad's time, the word slave was a type of work? You mean word? Your question is not clear for me. The word slave was a type of work? So a word is not a type of work. So your question is not clear for me. Or are you saying being a slave was a type of work? If you want, you can clarify your question, inshallah. Being a slave? Well, yani. I don't mean to sound condescending, but what do you understand from slave? What would a slave do? Is he just going to hang around your house and wear slippers and just sit on the couch and drink tea? Is a slave. So right? Unless something I don't understand from your question. That's what slave is. Slaves are for service. Is this clear for you? Or do you want to follow up your question? Now it's possible you'd buy a slave and you don't work him, but that's gonna be yani. You just I don't know why you bought him for. Maybe you bought the slave for just because you're a slave dealer, you're a slave trader. So you just buy slaves and you sell them. You buy and sell, not to work them, but because you're a trader. Maybe that's what you're. Well, slave's gonna do all kinds of stuff. He's gonna do whatever you tell him to do. You're gonna say to that slave, "You see that? All that feces out there, go clean it up. You see that bathroom right there? Go clean it up. For example, I'm just giving examples. It's all kinds of stuff. See those fruits high up there on that tree? Climb that tree and get those fruits. Or the like, or whatever you tell them to do. Compared to how people deceive what being a slave is of today. Well, it's not the work that's the issue, it's the treatment. That's the difference. This is the kuffar, especially like American, maybe even Australian too, when they went and they did genocide on the Aborigines there. And they enslaved them. What they do to them? They treat them so bad, right? They'll torture them, they degrade them, and stuff like that. Sometimes they'll have babies with their slave women and then enslave the baby too. It's their own baby and keep him as a slave. So none of that is what Muslims do. Ameen wa fiq. But when it comes to work, you're going to put them to work. That's what you get them for. Nah. Okay. So everything that can be sold can be a gift. Everything that can be sold, or anything that can be sold, can be a gift. Which only requires giving and taking. A gift only requires giving and taking. It does not require verbal agreement. That means you don't have to say, now I give you this gift. And then the other person, he doesn't have to say, I now accept your gift. You can just put the money in his hand, and then that's it. And then he can take it, and you don't have to exchange words. So a gift only requires giving and taking. It doesn't require a verbal agreement. One may even be charitable to a blasphemer, but being charitable to a Muslim is better. If you want to reserve your charities for Muslims, that's good. But it's not bad to be charitable to a kafir. Also, best to be charitable to your family. And best to be charitable to your neighbors too. Yes, it's best to be charitable to your family, and it's best to be charitable to your neighbors, and it's best to be charitable to Muslims. The family over the neighbor, and the Muslim over the kafir. And of course the neighbor over someone far. And neighbor is not only the person right next to you, right next door to you, not only your neighbor, also someone who's 2 doors down, 3 doors down, for example, few doors down. All those are your neighbors. One can also leave a gift for someone after death, which is the will. A gift after death, after the death of the giver. Saying, when I die, give this to Fulan. This gift of his after death, that's his will. And it's not the inheritance. To donate or grant or to contribute, there must be a verbal transfer of possession and a verbal acceptance. Yani, you want to donate to someone, you want it to be clear that this is a donation. You say to him, this is a donation. I donate this to you, or I donate this to your cause. Do you accept? And here it just crosses my mind. You can't give someone, if someone's selling something to you, you can't give him the money as a gift and then take it while he believes that he's selling it to you. This is invalid. The whole exchange is invalid. Yani, for you. Because you're the one who is doing something different. That other one, he didn't know that you weren't buying it. He thought you're just buying it. So he sold it to you just like he would do for every single person who comes in his store every single day. So why would he think something's different? And then here you come saying, oh, I can't buy this thing, but I want to obtain it. I'll give him the money as a gift and then obtain this thing. And then you just give him the money without saying anything. That's not valid for you to do. Yani, really it is an invalid deal, even from his side, but he wouldn't know that it's not valid, so he doesn't have to deem it not valid. Everything that can be sold can be donated, as well as something like 1 grain of wheat, because you can't sell 1 grain of wheat. So you're going to say, here, I donate this to you. These 3 types are recommended. These 3 types, what are these 3 types? Charities, gifts, and donations. They are recommended, but throwing the charity in the face of the recipient makes one lose its reward, the reward of that charity. When he says to him, remember when I did this and that for you? This makes the person lose his reward. A nightly wedding banquet after consummation is recommended. So that's just squeezed in here too. A nightly wedding banquet. That's squeezed in here because you'll be feeding people. You're inviting people and feeding them. The wedding banquet after consummation, a nightly wedding banquet after consummation is recommended. So, yani, this is the best way, that it's at night and after consummation. But still valid if it's at day and before consummation. And attendance is obligatory without an excuse. If you are invited to a wedding banquet, it's obligatory to attend if you don't have an excuse. And now we are moving on to talk about sharing. If one has more water than his immediate needs, and we're not talking about water that he put in containers, like he has a water source, a water hole, or a stream. He has more water than his immediate needs and the needs of his animals. Then he might be sometimes obligated to share his replenishable water from its source. Yani, sometimes he's going to be obligated to share his replenishable water from its source. From its source means like he has a stream, so he would be sometimes obligated to give someone access to his stream. Or he has a self-replenishing well, not the type of well that he has to refill it himself. Then sometimes he'd be obligated to share his replenishable water with someone to give him access. And he gives priority to people over animals. If he has to share, then he gives priority to people over animals. And if his water is adjacent to public pasture, meaning he has a stream, for example, on the other side of the stream is public land. He doesn't own it. The stream is part of his land. And so people graze their animals. And that's his stream right there. And this pasture doesn't have its own water or public water, Yani. There's no public water there. There's just his water and that pasture. Then he has to give priority to the people's animals over his own plants. Like, he can't say, no, you can't let your animals drink here because I need this water for my plants. When they need it. And even if it's not an emergency. Why? How come he has to share his, in our scenario here, his stream? Let the people bring their sheep or goats and eat the grass there and then drink from his stream. Even if it's not an emergency. But there's no public water though. If there were public water there, he could say, no, go use that water. Why? Because they cannot graze without the water. So if he prevents them from his water, then it's like he's preventing them from the pasture altogether. And he can't prevent them from the pasture. So now he can't prevent them from his water. But if they damage his property to drink, then all he can do is prevent them from coming so that they don't destroy his property. But he has to allow the shepherd to take water. And that's all we have there for sharing. And now we want to talk about divorcing and emancipating. This is still under the theme of releasing, relinquishing, not keeping. By consensus, a husband may divorce his wife three times. In sequence, yani, one after the other, or in one statement, like if he said, you are divorced 3 times. In one session, like if he says, I divorce you once, and now I divorce you a second time, and now I divorce you the 3rd time, all in the same session. Or in different sessions, like 1 year he divorced her, he brought her back, let's say, or they got remarried again. Then 5 years later he divorced her, then 6 months later he divorced her. So that's 3 divorces in 3 different sessions. Conditionally or unconditionally. Conditionally is like he says, if you leave the house, you're divorced. If you talk to Fulan, you're divorced. Now this conditional divorce, why would a man do it? Because he doesn't want his wife to do something. But he doesn't have, he doesn't want his wife to do something. Let's just leave it that way. He doesn't want his wife to do something, so he tells her, if you do such and such, you're divorced. Don't forget, conditional divorce cannot be taken back. Once you state the condition, you cannot take it back. But sometimes you need to take some intention into consideration. Like if he says, if you leave the house, you're divorced. It's possible that he means, if you leave the house right now while we're in the heat of this argument. And he doesn't mean ever. So in this case, it will be in accordance with his intention. They're arguing. She wants to leave. He doesn't want her to leave. He says, if you leave this house, you're divorced. He means right now. He doesn't mean ever. So that intention is considered. That intention is considered. And sometimes the husband doesn't actually have a right religiously to stop his wife from doing something, but he doesn't want her to do it. Like if he doesn't want his wife to talk to another man or a particular man, it's not his right. If he says to his wife, I don't like for you to talk to Fulan, and then she talks to him, she's not sinning. So what can he do? He might put a conditional divorce there. He said, if you talk to Fulan, you're divorced. So then she talks to him, she's divorced. Or if he says to her, she's coming down the stairs, and then when she's on the middle stair or the middle step, he says to her, if you go up the stairs, you're divorced. If you come down the stairs, you're divorced. So what can she do? If she's able, she can just hop over the side. Now she won't be divorced. Now, what's the point of these examples I'm giving you? It's not a point to humiliate the woman here. The point is to understand the rules. That's how the conditional divorce would work. If you said to her, if you go up the stairs, you're divorced. If you come down the stairs, you're divorced. Then the condition is set now. So how she might avoid that then, if she hopped over the side, she wouldn't be divorced. She would not be divorced. So he might divorce her conditionally or unconditionally. Unconditionally means he just says, you are divorced. Conditionally is like he says, when your period goes off, you're divorced. And then he has to pay what reconciles her heart if he consummated. Yani, if he consummated the marriage with this wife of his, if they had sexual intercourse in their marriage and then he divorced her, then he has to pay her what reconciles her heart. That means he has to give her something. It's like a dowry. When I say it's like a dowry, means something. So he says to her, accept this money as reconciliation payment or muta'ah payment. But I don't have any details here. I need to review. What if she wants something else? I need to review. And also, a master may emancipate his slave. So, having a slave is similar to having a spouse. That doesn't mean your slave is like your spouse. No, it means there's a connection here between the two. Just like the marriage will make a connection between the two spouses, slavery will make a connection between the master and the slave. Whether the master's male or female, and whether the slave's male or female. But one's wife's not a slave, and the husband's not a slave. It's just, I'm making an analogy for a relationship that is formed because of this institution, the institution of marriage or the institution of slavery. So how are you going to break that? Just like if one wanted to divorce his wife, he'd say to his slave, you are free, or I emancipate you, or I free you, I liberate you, anything like that. Just like divorce. If he said, I divorce you, or you are divorced, or anything that means divorce, then she'll be divorced. Same thing. So he says, you're a free man now, you're a free woman now, I free you, I release you, etc., etc. But there's a type of slave that his freedom is made dependent on the master's death. So it would be said to him, when I die, then you are free. So this person is really a regular slave, though. He stays a regular slave until the master dies, then he'll be free. But if he gets sold before the master dies, or given as a gift even, then this condition will be broken. The condition of being freed when the master dies will be broken then. And also, a woman may give her turn to her co-wife or to her husband. So, if she gives the turn to her co-wife, so you know how the man has to go, if he has more than one wife, he has to spend time with. Once he spends time with one of his wives, he has to spend time with all of them. And he doesn't get to choose the sequence. Rather, he does a drawing. Let's say he has 4 wives. So then, when he wants to start a cycle, he would, for example, do a lottery. Have all their names in a bag or a hat. Maybe shake it up if he wants to. And then, so the first name he pulls out, she gets first turn. Second name gets second turn, etc. So now the wives have their turns. So a wife, she has her own turn. That's her right. So she can give her turn to her co-wife, like one of them. Then, when it was his obligation to go to her, now it's his obligation to go to the other one. Because she gave her turn, which was, let's say, was that night was her turn. She gave it to her co-wife. Now he has to go to that other one. Or she could give her turn to her husband. Now he can choose where he wants to go. And she can relieve him of spousal duties. That means the support. She can relieve him of that, and that is non-binding. So she can take that relief back and then request her rights. And one must also grant his wife possession of her food and clothing, as opposed to his other dependents. Wallahu a'lam. We'll stop there. Question. So once he or she frees the slave, they can't go back on their word and change their mind in freeing the slave? No, it's not a slave anymore. How would that work? If you were a slave and then your master said to you, now you're free. So then you can say, oh wait, oh man, I forgot about that work I wanted you to do. You know what? I take you back. You're my slave again. Doesn't work. What I know is that he has to do the lottery every time he wants to start a new cycle. And I haven't learned that it depends on the number of wives. Just that he has more than one. Yani, once he finishes his cycle, he doesn't have to go to any of them. So when he wants to start a new cycle, then he does a lottery or a drawing. And does this apply for the travel with him as well, the drawing? Let me review that part, insha'Allah ta'ala. Ameen wa fikum. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Same right now. Say the slave that killed her master. Would she be free then?
No, not unless he made her pregnant.
So he made her pregnant and she killed her. Now she's free.
Yeah, she would be free because he died. So the rule
That's
is,
correct.
yeah, the rule is, if a man has walad, she's called walad. That means mother of the child. That's a slave woman. If a man has a walad, then when he dies, she's free. And that means then, even if she killed him. Okay. You say, is it only the walima that is an obligation to attend and not the nikah? Yeah, it's the walima. The walima itself that you're obligated to attend if you're invited. And you don't have an excuse.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Question: if the slave kills the master, does that also include that if what if they would that fall under like the slave going into what is the word inheritance going towards like the son or the children or anything like that, or the woman is just free?
No, none of the slaves are going to be freed by the death of the master except the walad and the one whose freedom was made contingent upon the death of his master.
Okay.
All the other types of slaves, they're just going to stay slaves. Their slavery doesn't end by the master's death. And just by the way here, before we sign off, we said in some different lessons before, the institution of slavery really is an important one. And we're not going to talk like some kuffar talk. Like they talk like slavery being bad is a given. They would say, well, slavery is a horrible thing, of course. Like, there's no question about it. So, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if when the caliphate restarts and then Muslims started getting slaves again, the kuffar are going to be outraged that Muslims are practicing slavery at this time. But this is a very important institution, really. Remember, where's the source, the original source of slaves? From war. It's the original source. Not kidnapping, from war. And so then, what you going to do with all your prisoners? Just kill them all? That's it? All of them? Women, children, old people? Spill all their blood? Well, we're Muslims, we're not really about that. That's not our goal, is go around killing people. That's not our interest, to kill people. So what you going to do with them? Incarcerate them? That's a lot of money there. Just keep them incarcerated? God knows, like, what's that Guantanamo, for example? How much does that cost? And who pays for that? That's going to be a lot of money, for sure. Just for one prisoner is a lot of money. So what you going to do with them? Set them free so they can just keep fighting you too? Just run back out and go re-up and come back to fight you again? Well, those are all options, but there's also another option, which is slavery. That's important. طيب. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.